In today's episode, I speak to Jon Baker about the introverts productivity gap. We discuss introversion and how it affects how leaders respond to their employees. I ponder whether the real problem with introverts, a lack of productivity, is due to a deficit of real leadership skills within the organisation. And Jon talks about the differences between introverts and extroverts and how leaders need to factor this in if they wish to increase productivity. Listen up to the rest of the conversation. Before we begin our conversation, here is a quick shout out to the pathologically curious. Check out the Maverick Paradox magazine. It's a digital magazine written by Mavericks for business owners and professionals. You can find the magazine at themaverickparadox.com. The magazine's aim is to provoke maverick leadership everywhere. Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you would like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today our guest is Jon Baker. Hi, Jon.
Hi, Jude. How are you doing?
I'm doing all. So, Jon, who are you?
Oh, now there's a good question. So, yeah, as you said, my name is Jon, but I specialise in working with leaders about introversion, putting it really, really simply. So for about 15 years, I've been running my own business, and prior to that, a fairly mixed up career, if I can put it like that. I think I got too old far too quickly and started to understand things at the age of nearly 60, I must admit, and understanding things I probably should have done for many years ago, but maybe I'm just slow. But no, I'd had various roles from retail management, marketing, leadership, training and coaching. And so about 15 years ago, set up my own coaching business. So I've had lots of big company and self-employed experience. And then a couple of years ago, as I was just started saying, I specialised in introversion because, first of all, yes, I'm an introvert. Second of all, I think a lot of the coaching interactions I had, which had worked the best, had been with introverts. And thirdly, I'd been doing some research and started to realise there's a big problem out there. And I call it the introvert productivity gap. So I started to work with leaders to help them understand introversion and close that productivity gap. And I'll just quickly fill in what I mean by that before we go on. So I interviewed about 450 people in various businesses of various sizes. And the basic question was around how productive they are. And about a third of people they will admit quietly when they're not talking to their boss, they're not properly productive, which to me seems shocking when in an age where we'll go and spend a large amount of money to try and get a 5% productivity improvement, we've got a third of our staff. And I think 450 people is enough to sit there and say, yeah, this is a fairly common problem, but a third of our staff are not properly productive. Unpeeling that a bit further was then starting to say, well, why not? And the most common reasons were where three things overlapped. One was communication within a company, two was culture in a company, and the third was particularly important where these people were introverts. And I just said, well, hang on. So communication and culture in a company, both leadership controlled activities, are not working for introverts. So that was when I started to look at it further. And since then, I've spoken to a lot of HR people, a lot of other people in other businesses to find, yeah, actually, they completely buy into it. In fact, they'd say it was higher than the third that I talk about.
Why is that? Do you think it's because introverts are overlooked by the extroverts?
I think, first of all, that lots of people don't understand or don't even think about what introversion is. Shall we put it like that? I think there's an extrovert bias in UK or particularly Western business society. And And then, yeah, because of the misunderstanding, I'm assuming it's misunderstanding. I assume that leaders don't deliberately want that kind of productivity gap. Because of that, they work in ways that don't necessarily help introverts to flourish, to perform at their best. And as a result, there's less engagement, there's less, what I think is the biggest thing of all, less diversity of thought, whether it's in a team, a board, or whatever. And you end up with more groupthink, which we could talk about for a long time, I'm sure, Jude. But we end up, as a result of many of the introverts, shall we say, being less engaged, we end up with less productivity and less proper thinking going on in the business.
So I'm taking it then that this is more than putting introverts into a noisy, open-planned office.
Absolutely. Now, I think I have to say the open plan office was not invented by an introvert. Yes, many introverts absolutely hate it. I mean, I always remember many years ago now, it was my first day in my second ever proper job, and I was really excited. And one of those times when you just think nothing can pull me down. I remember walking into the building across to the receptionist, and I felt about 15 foot tall. And then, and this is the really sad bit, so please don't cancel the interview right now. At that point, I was given a photo ID card. This was quite a while ago. And suddenly I'm like, wow, look at me. I've got a photo ID card. Nothing will bring me down. Followed her across the reception area. She opened the door into the main building, and then it hit me. And by the way, I don't mean the door hit me. I mean this noise. I was swept away by a tsunami of noise, and I just wanted to turn around and run. It turns out I had to make myself stop, breathe, and keep going on. But it turns out this was just a couple of hundred people in the office chatting, an open plan office. And that was my first ever open plan office experience. So do I think open plan office is a good thing? Certainly not. But do I think that the introvert issue, as I say, is more than open plan offices? Oh, absolutely, yes.
Okay, that made me think of a couple of things. One, it's the thing about neurodiverse people as well would struggle in a noisy environment. And I remember coming to do some consulting for a particular firm a couple of years ago, and it was interesting because for years I'd worked in open office environments, and they were reasonably productive places, and that's probably to do with the design of the equipment. So whilst I looked at it and thought, oh, these open planned, when I compared it to this other organisation, I realised what was different with the first one was that the furniture was strategic to create sound barriers, privacy, and all that sort of stuff. So I, for many, many years, was going, open plan office, that's not really a problem, because I've always worked where it's been structurally planned to be productive. But when I went to this other firm, I could not believe what a real, true open plan office sounded like. It was so noisy that as soon as everybody was in, you could not have a phone call. You couldn't have a conversation because as other people were doing, this is even before COVID, they were doing Zoom calls with no speakers or anything, like no headphones. It was like just speaking into their camera. You're like, so it was getting to the point where you were coming in at a ridiculously early time just so you can have a couple, like 7:30 to get a couple of hours worth of working. And then they're going, I wonder if I should just leave early and work from home, because you just couldn't do nothing.
Yeah, and as you say, that's just the background noise part of the open plan office. And is that bad? Does it stop people from thinking clearly? Yes, it has to. And is that just an introvert problem? No. Okay. Introverts will listen far more. They tend to be better listeners, and they tend to use all those senses. But it's not, the noise is not just an introvert thing. However, from an introvert perspective, some of the other things I think with open plan are the ability to just pop and sit on somebody's desk and just ask a question, which in some ways, don't get me wrong, I think that the collaborative aspects, and we've had many of these discussions in recent months as people start returning to the office to get more collaboration, but the collaborative aspects of being in an office, I think, are good. But from an introvert perspective, introverts tend to think things through before speaking. and they tend to like to structure their thoughts before they say the words. The way I describe that is introverts will think to talk. So ask them a question, and there's almost a little bit of a gap before the structured answer comes out. Whereas extroverts tend to talk to think. Words get fired back out as their way of thinking through the issues. Now, the point that I'm getting to is if you come and plonk things down on a desk and just start chatting to an introvert, it's like, oh, hang on. I'm having to adapt my way of thinking. You're not putting them in their best place, which is why, for example, in meetings, I always sit there and say to people, for goodness sake, get the agenda, get all the pre-read, get all the data out well before the meeting if you want proper engagement, because you allow the introverts to think things through. And by the way, some of the extroverts do it as well. But back to the popping on the desk. So if somebody just pops and sits on the desk, it can feel very, very intrusive. Whereas an extrovert might love that interaction. For an introvert, it can feel much more intrusive. And so that's another aspect that people don't think about when they say, our open office is good.
I'm just thinking, and you're going to slap me around the head now.
Oh, excellent.
Because I'm thinking, surely that's the responsibility of the introvert to say, not right now, I need to come back. Because I'm sort of thinking, I'm an extrovert, as you can probably guess. And most of the time when I used to be employed, and I was like the manager, people would just turn up in the office, in your area of the office, just to talk to people. But that was because they hadn't really been given a standard of engagement, where you can say to people, like, yes, if it becomes you can't work because there's 150 million interruptions, then you should do something about it. Surely that's the responsibility of the leader as well as the individual, no?
Okay, now, so I think you're absolutely right. It's very easy to sit there and say it's just the leader, or it's just the situation, or it's just the introvert. And the answer is no, of course not. It's a responsibility of all of those people. So I'll be honest, when I used to work in an open plan office, I would cut down my email and my phone calls. One that used to amaze me, how many people will email somebody that's sitting next to them. And it's like, this is crazy. But I would probably once an hour, every hour or so, I would get up and walk around the office and quickly catch up with people and say, yes, rather than emailing them. And I think that generates better results. But the first thing I'd always sit there and say is, do you have a moment now, or shall I come back later, or can we talk later? I wouldn't just launch into stuff. So in that sense, I was giving a bit of control to the other person, which I think is only polite. But your question is it the responsibility of the introvert as well? And the answer's got to be yes.
Yeah.
Of course it is. But let's start from the position where let's talk about that talk to think versus think to talk thing.
I like that.
And I know it myself because I will do it. And I know it because I've spoken to many introverts who feel it, despite the fact they do not need to feel ashamed of that. There are times when I'm thinking, I feel bad because I haven't got an instant bit of repartee and an instant flowing back answer, and it kind of puts me on the back foot. So I'm already in a position where I'm feeling on the back foot at a time when I'm being asked the question. So then to say, "Oh, go away, I'm busy," it makes me feel even more on the back foot. So I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm just saying that I think that to give the introvert all of the responsibility is wrong. I certainly think it's a shared responsibility. But it's like many things where many leaders I've worked with has just said, well, the quiet ones in the team should just speak up. They should get out of their comfort zone and just get on with it. I'm thinking, no, that's certainly not the best thing to do. You're certainly not. By making somebody uncomfortable as a leader, by making somebody uncomfortable, you're not going to get the best from them.
Yeah, I think because what strikes me there is that these seem to be deficits of good leadership, whether that's the leadership from an external source, so another person, or leadership from an internal source, like yourself. So I have found if I was training somebody or coaching or mentoring or something, and they were very introverted, in that way, I would say you need to give place markers. So you need to say, let me go away, think about that, or give me a second, I'm still thinking. Or in the same way that, again, as an extrovert, I do often think out loud. So, my thoughts come at the end of the sentence sometimes rather than the beginning. So I'll tend to contextualize it and say, I am externally processing right now. Just
absolutely.
so that people understand what's going on.
But you're aware of it, Jude, whereas lots of people are not. And for many people, they don't even consider it. And some of the downsides to that lead to some of the other issues in meetings and issues in discussion, shall we say. And one of my favourite, least favourite, I ought to say, is in a conversation, many extroverts train the introverts inadvertently that the introvert's answer is not required.
Oh, tell me more about that.
And when you think about that, then the ramifications there, that just leads immediately to more disengagement, to less diverse thinking, etc. So come back to this introvert thinking versus extrovert thinking, internal thinking and processing versus it's the external. Talk to think to talk. That's all the basis of what we're discussing here. So if I ask you a question, you will typically fire some words out fairly quickly. And as you just said, you'll contextualize it a bit by you might sit there and say, I'm thinking this out loud. But you're one of the more aware people. Many introverts will have that slight gap and then they'll start to speak. Now, of course, there's things introverts can do about that, but let's come back to that in a little while. But that gap very often gets seized upon by others in the room or the extrovert as they don't have anything to say. I will fill the gap. Whereas introverts are happy with gaps in the conversation, extroverts tend to not like them and will jump in on the gap. So if you just ask me a question, I go silent for a second, and then you jump in and into the gap and fill it. And you do that repeatedly because that's the personality types concerned. Over time, you're training me that my answer is not required. So I'm like, okay, I've phased out. I don't need to answer that because I know that you will for me. And it just starts to create a problem.
Obviously, more people need to be trained in leadership then by me.
Absolutely, yeah.
Because I would have thought, because I think if you can see when someone is processing this, if you're paying attention. But even if you're on the phone and you're not having, you can still hear the processing, or just ask. It's not that difficult. But I think do you think there's a danger though in stereotyping all extroverts do one thing and all introverts do another?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I'll sit there and I'll give the warning now because I was going to make it at some point in the statement, but in this conversation, that labels, which is labels or stereotypes, whatever you want to call them, can be incredibly useful. They can also be phenomenally dangerous. So from the point of view of a very quick diagnosis, and I can categorize you and going, you probably, and I'll note the word there, probably, are extroverted and you probably will act like this. It's the beginning of me thinking things through, and then I can seek evidence around that as opposed to something else. Whereas, and that's okay, because that's quick, that's diagnosis, and that can be helpful, as opposed to the way that many people seem to use labels. Oh, I'm an extrovert, I'm a ENTP, or whatever it might be in any personality type of analysis. I'm a this, I'm a that, therefore I can't ... Well, that's absolute rubbish.
Yeah, because there aren't that many people who are on the extremes, aren't they? We're all on the kind of, I think, a sliding, in the sense that I'm a highly extroverted person. However, I can also have very intense introversion.
No, absolutely.
I just need to be on my own to think through, work stuff out. And also there's a lot of introverts that I've seen have learned to be a bit more of an ambivert. So when they're in a particular scenario, they can be very outgoing, very engaging, because that's what they need to do. And then come home and completely be wiped out because they need to get...
and that's the real classic. I mean, let's just step back to some definitional points, and that is the real classic. Where does the energy or the energy loss come from? And as you just said, I can go and spend all day with a group of people and love it, but I will be completely wiped out and de-energized as a result. Whereas you remember when we used to first meet at that networking event in London over, I can't think of the name of the restaurant now, but
oh yes,
I would be completely wiped out by that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I could tell from many other people in the room, they're almost glowing and growing as the energy, just absorbing it. It's like, right, get me out of here. I've had enough. It's not that I don't like socializing. It's not that I don't enjoy conversation. However, it will completely wipe me out. And that's the thing with the introversion. Now, I can learn tactics to make it slightly easier. I can appear to be extroverted. I can appear to do all these other things. But am I most effective when I'm pretending to be something else, when I'm doing other tactics? And the answer is no. None of us are at our best when we are, whatever it is that we are, doing something other than our own natural style. Yes, we can all do it, but we're never going to be at our most effective. And coming back to the real question that was kind of sitting underneath this, which is about, is it the responsibility of the leader or the introvert? And the answer is it's both. But what can the leader do? And the first thing is about being more aware. And we're having this conversation because you're already very aware, but there are many that are not. And I think the first thing is to go, right, as a leader, how can I be more aware? Because somebody said to me once, oh, introverts, they're shy, they don't like conversation, and they're a bit slow. And you know what? It takes so long to manage them. I just leave them to themselves.
Gosh, that is such poor leadership.
Oh, I completely agree.
I do in my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders, I do spend a little time kind of going through what extraversion and what introversion is, on the basis that you can get introverted mavericks, but their introversion is in relation to another maverick, not in relation to a conformist introvert, if that makes sense.
Mm.
And I think the problem when words become, scientific words become commonplace, the actual real meaning ends up getting lost. So like introversion and extroversion has become in many people's ideas as loud and party loving and quiet and book reading.
Absolutely.
When there are, there's so much more around that. So what would you say a leader needs to do because as I say, you can have an introvert in a workplace who for the day appears like any other extrovert, for example. So they might not even know there's an introvert in their midst. So what can a leader do to ensure that introverts are able to be productive? Do they need to change anything that they do like this?
Well, I think the first thing is to be aware that it's not about treating introverts differently.
Uh-huh.
It's about managing all staff appropriately, which is my answer to, it takes longer to manage introverts. No, it's about managing all staff by being in an appropriate way. It's about realizing the benefits of managing all your staff appropriately, the diversity of thought, the engagement, the productivity that you get from a great team. So coming back to the direct question, I think the first thing is about being aware, listening out for, watching out for some of the signs that somebody might be introverted, and looking for 2 or 3 of those to sit there and then go, okay, what could I do? And I think the first thing, having spoken to many introverts about this, is to zip it. And by which I mean, when you ask the question, whether it's on a one-to-one basis or in a team meeting. I mean, I wrote a book called Running Meetings That Make Things Happen. And this was a large part of it, because so many leaders have said to me, there's always a quiet couple in the room that never speak up. And then my answer to that is, tell me about everyone else. Well, most of the rest of the team are just speak up sometimes and don't others. And then there's these 2 or 3 that never shut up. And well, there's the problem to start with. Is the problem the ones that don't shut up, or is the problems the ones that don't speak up? But the first thing is, as a leader, at times, zip it. Be aware of that gap in the conversation. When you've asked a question, allow the introverts the bit of space to answer it. And that might be literally shutting up for a second longer than you might otherwise do. That might be about asking the question again in a slightly different way or probing in a different way. In a meeting sense, I'd say it's about holding back. So if you're running a meeting and there's a couple that always speak up and drown the thing out, you've got to hold them back sometimes. You've got to be capable of, whether it's blunt facilitation or you shut up, let the others speak. Well, I wouldn't do it quite like that, but I think you probably get the point. Or is it about structuring the meeting so that everyone has a bit more thinking time without reacting verbally? So the old trainers things of, okay, nobody speak for the next 30 seconds. I'd like you to write down your answers. And the old trainer way of doing it, of course, would be on Post-it notes. And then when it's all written down, you can go and plaster them all over the walls, which gets everybody more engaged in the answer. You don't have to do it on Post-it note. You could just
let me stop you there.
Okay.
I thought that was really interesting because you said that would get everybody else engaged. And I was thinking, no, not for me. Come on and talk about it.
I agree.
So I think it's
immediately, and there's the point. You immediately go, oh, well, I won't be engaged, and therefore don't want to do it. But actually, to flip it the other way and go, well, there's people equally that are unengaged by just speaking. So what I'm trying to say is getting some time to write something first, then. So method one might be to use Post-it notes. Method number two might be just to go, right, okay. Now we're going to work. Now everyone's had 30 seconds to think about their answer, write it down, whatever. We're going to work around the room one by one, and just I want to hear the answers. So then I could turn to you first, and then ask your thoughts.
I think what's key is thinking about the whole diversity of thought issue. I know that when I'm designing, if I'm doing a training program, for example, I ensure that throughout the day that all the activities, there will be activities that will fit all different styles of learning, all different preference models, and also be very much aware of who's doing what or how things are working, when you're actually doing the event itself. And it's surprising to me that a lot of other people, because what I see a lot of some of the training that I've been on is that people tend to train in the style that they prefer.
Yeah.
So if they prefer a lot of reflection, then that's what the course is, or they prefer. Not that many people are really sort of going, well, I might prefer to talk if somebody's put me on training and it was predominantly discursive and a bit of reflection, I'd be quite happy. But I would not design a training course like that, because there are so many different ways of taking on information, which is more applicable for different types of information.
Absolutely right. And that's the whole point. So when I say write it, I don't mean the whole day should be about, oh yes, never having any shouting things out, but at times having space to work in a different way. And it works on Zoom meetings as well, whether we use polls, all these other activities that we can do rather than just all blurting out. Well, we've had remote meetings in the last year, but you don't use polls all day long. You also have the chat box. You also have discussion. You also have whiteboards. There's all sorts of other things that you use. And it is absolutely about using the range of them to help people start to get engaged. Because generally speaking, once people start to engage in the whole thing, they'll continue to engage, even if it goes away from the style that they naturally prefer.
Agreed. So this sounds like a good place to stop. But before we do that, do you have one tip you'd like to share with the audience?
Always. Which particular? A tip on what? Let's start there.
Okay. Let's do it from a leadership perspective. So what's the one tip for leaders around introversion that will help improve their leadership style?
I absolutely think it is that awareness thing. It's about understanding some of the introvert myths and watching out for introversion.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Would you come back another day?
I'd love to.
Brilliant. Thanks, Jon. Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Jon as much as I enjoyed having it. At the Maverick Paradox, we improve your impact and influence by enabling you to effectively strategize, innovate, and execute to find out more, contact us at judith@maverickparadox.com. Thank you.
Are you interested in maverick leadership but unsure how to apply it? We can help. Judith Germain has collaborated with David Chislett to produce a 12-part video series on maverick leadership and how to apply it to your creative thinking skills. This will truly get you thinking and putting into action your ability to innovate and execute, truly changing your outcomes. Check out the show notes for the link or contact us on judith@maverickparadox.com for more information. If you are pathologically curious and would love to find out more about the Maverick Paradox, then please subscribe to this podcast on one of the popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you could explore our resources on Mavericks at maverickparadox.com or read the Maverick Paradox magazine. We publish frequently each week. If you subscribe, you will get our monthly newsletter. And let's not forget my book, The Maverick Paradox, The Secret Power Behind Successful Leaders. For those that love a good discussion, you could apply to join our exclusive Facebook group. Finally, if you would like to work with us or are interested in the Maverick at work, check out maverickparadox.co.uk.